Welcome to the 2024 Assistance to Firefighters Grant Program Application Development Training Series. In this session, we will cover the development of the narrative for the 2024 application. The first thing we want you to know is that help is available to you throughout this process. One resource is our Regional Fire Program Specialist. There is at least one in each one of the 10 FEMA regions. The URL here will take you to the website to view their contact information. The next option is the AFG Help Desk. It is staffed during business hours by fire service professionals that know the program and the fire service. The last bullet contains a link to our website where you can download self-help materials to assist you with developing your application and your narrative, and we will discuss these later in the presentation. The AFG program sends out a monthly newsletter and program updates as necessary. Ensure you are signed up to receive these critical emails. All awards have been made for all the 2023 AFG programs. You should have received your turndown letter if you were not awarded. If you'd like more information on why you were not successful, there is a link in your turndown letter to request that additional assistance, or you can simply contact your regional fire program specialist. Depending on when you are viewing this webinar, the 2024 AFG application period is open or will be opening soon. The application period will open at 9:00 a.m. on the first day and end at 5 p.m. on the final day. All times are Eastern Time. This program is predicated around developing your narrative, and we will also cover what is new for 2024 and our top 10 best practices. The fire grant programs have three parts: the Assistance to Firefighters Grant, which is what we're discussing today; the Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response, better known as SAFER, which provides funding to fire departments to increase staffing to meet national standards either through the hiring of full-time staff or the recruitment or retention of volunteers. Fire Prevention and Safety provides funding to bolster fire prevention activities within a municipality, and it also has a research and development component to fund studies that could impact the fire service and firefighter safety. Below each program is the funding that Congress has appropriated for FY 2024. Additionally, initially, both AFG and SAFER are equally funded at $324 million. However, 10% of the funds allocated to AFG are used to fund the Fire Prevention and Safety Grant. Let's discuss what's new for 2024. Language was added to clarify ineligible items under the Wellness and Fitness activity. We discussed those in the Wellness and Fitness Modification to Facilities and Training session. For state fire training academies, the language was added to clarify eligible costs with respect to the repair of training props. Under the equipment activity, the other EMS equipment line item was replaced with several specific items that were then prioritized high, medium, or low. Please watch our equipment and PPE training session to learn more. To apply for the Assistance to Firefighters Grant Program, you must be registered and active in the System for Award Management. Your SAM.gov account becomes inactive after a year if no action has been taken to update the account. So make sure this is done prior to applying to ensure your account does not become inactive through the award process. Entity validation for new registrants can take anywhere from 5 days to several weeks, depending on the documentation needed for the validation. If you do not have a SAM.gov account, it is imperative that you get started on this immediately. The system is free and requires no cost to register. In addition, help getting registered is also free. Here on the slide is a web address for the Federal Support Desk and their phone number depending on your preference. You are absolutely allowed to hire a grant writer. The Assistance to Firefighters Grant Program will reimburse you for the cost of a grant writer up to $1,500 if you are awarded. Your cost share, whether 5, 10, or 15%, is also applicable to the grant writer fees. Please note that if you do hire a grant writer, you will need to claim those costs in the request details section of your application. You must pay your grant writer within 90 days of the Notice of Funding Opportunity release and 30 days after the application period closes. Grant writer services must be competitively procured, and we strongly recommend following your local procurement policy. You will be required to submit a copy of the grant writer's contract, a copy of the invoice or purchase order, a copy front and back of the canceled check used to pay the grant writer or other acceptable proof of payment, and a copy of your local procurement policy. If you do not have a local procurement policy, please follow the federal requirements outlined in 2 CFR Part 200, 318 through 320. Some important things to consider when hiring a grant writer are grant writers should be assigned permissions as a grant writer in FEMA Go. Be wary of giving your grant writer permissions as an authorized organization representative in FEMA Go, as this gives them the ability to do things like submitting your application or accepting your award. The application period is short and a busy time for grant writers. Some use templates or somewhat duplicative narratives, which could have significant impacts on your panel review score if the panelists notice the similarities, and they will. If you hire a grant writer, they must be identified as such in the application, even if you are not requesting a reimbursement for the cost of their services. The AFG program consists of 3 separate applications. The first is Operations and Safety that consists of 5 activities: equipment, personal protective equipment, training, modification to facilities, and wellness and fitness. The second is a Vehicle Acquisition. Eligible applicants can request to replace unsafe fire apparatus and ambulances in their existing fleet. The third is a regional request where 2 or more departments combine to request a mutual need. It's important to note that each of these applications moves through the scoring process separately, as do the 5 activities under Operations and Safety. Please watch our activity-specific training sessions to learn more about the different application types. State fire training academies have their own separate and distinct applications. Now that we've discussed the application types, let's talk about developing your narrative. You can start today using a Word document to develop the narrative that is going to be part of your application. The text in a Word document can easily be cut and pasted into the application. It's important to understand that the people who will be reviewing your application are from the fire service, so write your narratives clearly and concisely with the understanding that the people you are trying to justify your need to understand the fire service. Make sure that you are involving others in the development of your narrative and allowing them to review it throughout the process. Try to make sure that you are providing information that is unique to your community and relate local information and statistics, as opposed to using information that is part of the national narrative. In other words, if you are asking for a thermal imaging camera, you want to discuss why you need it and how you use it, as opposed to what you expect is done nationally. Try not to use brand names, as these will often get flagged by panelists and could affect your score. Each narrative section is limited to 4,000 characters, and this includes spaces. Before we go any further, we want to make sure that you are aware of the self-help resources available to you for developing your narrative. The first is a self-evaluation sheet. There are 2 of these, one for operations and safety requests, and a second for requests involving vehicle acquisition. In both cases, the self-evaluation sheets include the exact criteria the panelists will be using to review the 4 scored sections of your narrative. You can use these a couple of ways. First, you can use the criteria as you develop your narrative to ensure that you are touching on all of the required points. Second, you can provide these to someone who is reviewing your narrative and ask them to check it to ensure that all of the criteria have been addressed. The next resource is the Narrative Development Toolkit. This resource builds off of the self-evaluation sheets in that it provides you with tips and ideas on how you can meet the criteria identified in the self-evaluation sheets. It also provides you with best practices when developing your narrative and sample narratives to give you a feel for how your narrative should flow. There are 4 sections of the application narrative that are scored, and those are denoted here with the 25%. However, there are 5 elements that we believe that you must address in order to be successful, and we are going to talk about each one individually in the order of how you will see them in the application. The first you will come to is financial need. This is where you are going to convince the panelists that there is no way that you can complete this project without the assistance of federal funds. One of the first and most important things you'll need to do is compare your income to expenses to show funding deficiencies. You'll need to articulate where your money comes from and how it is expended. One of the common scoring deficiencies we see after every panel review is the lack of detail in financial need. To ensure that you have provided adequate detail, you will need to explain where your money comes from, whether taxes, fundraising, calls for service, etc., and then explain how you spend it by listing out some common line items from your operating budget like personnel, fringe benefits, training, building or vehicle maintenance, fuel, etc., and show how much you have allocated to each. The goal is to lay out your operating budget to show there are no funds left at the end of the day to fund a project like the one you are requesting. Once you've discussed your operating budget, then you can move on to other financial stressors that might be affecting your community or your department. These include other capital projects that are happening in your community that may be preventing you from getting a piece of the capital improvement funds. Discuss the unemployment rate if it's relevant. Talk about loss of tax base if you're experiencing a loss in population or businesses. If you rely on fundraising to augment your operating budget, you want to discuss that, especially if it has not been up to par. If you have non-tax paying entities such as national forests, colleges, or universities that rely on your services but do not pay into your budget, you may want to consider discussing them as well. One of the first sections that panelists go to when they begin reading an application is the organization or community description. This is simply for them to get to know the department that is submitting the application. Although this section is not scored, it certainly sets the tone for the panelist review. You'll want to discuss where you are in the state and possibly geographic anomalies in your area. Talk about the area that you cover, your population. You will definitely want to discuss your department, how many stations you have, possibly number and type of apparatus, call volume, and services that you provide. Focus on things that make your department or your community unique. You'll want to discuss anything that is happening in your community that is affecting your ability to respond. This could be significant growth or decline, a spike in development that could be creating an increase in call volume. If you suggest here that you have had an increase in call volume, it should be reflected in the call volume section because the panelists will go look. You do not need to discuss all of your critical infrastructure here, but you may want to discuss a couple of those items that may keep you up at night or that you consider significant hazards. The next scored section of the narrative we will discuss is the project description and budget. In this section, you get to explain to the panelists all aspects of your project to include what the problem is with the item you are replacing, why the project you're requesting is the right solution in alignment with the program priorities, and some potential benefits of the new purchase and how much the project or equipment is going to cost. You want to show that your project will be completed within the 2-year period of performance. However, this should not be merely stated, but rather articulated through milestones or goals associated with the project. You'll also want to describe how you determined this was your most important need through a risk assessment or some other process. It is important that you do a good job justifying your request, as the panelists are going to determine whether your project is necessary and if it's reasonable. This section is referred to as a project description and budget, so it's important that you describe how you came to determine your cost estimate and that you clearly show a budget for the items that you plan to purchase. And always tie the goals of your project or the solution associated with the project to your department's mission. The cost benefit section is your opportunity to show the benefits of the project as it relates to the cost. This part of the narrative is very project driven, as many of the benefits will be determined by what exactly it is that you're purchasing and the impact that it has on your department. Some things to consider are benefits to firefighter or public safety, decreases in property loss or loss of life, frequency of use, decreased overhead, administrative cost, insurance or maintenance cost. You'll also want to discuss how your project benefits your mutual aid partners. To show the cost of the project and that the project will benefit more than just your department is a great benefit in relation to the cost. There may also be inferred benefits, such as the savings associated with reduced on-the-job injuries or workers' comp claims. Another way to show benefits as they relate to the cost is to break down your cost per capita. One way to do this is to take the total cost of your project and divide it by the population that you serve. Take that number and divide it again by the useful life of whatever it is that you're purchasing. An example could be SCBA that could have a potential useful life of up to 15 years. As with cost benefit, the statement of effect narrative is very project driven. However, in this section, you'll want to show the benefits of the project as it relates to your daily operations. You want to describe how the project will improve operations or make your department more viable and effective. Discuss any reduction in risk to firefighters or the public. Explain how often the equipment will be used, as frequency of use is important. Explain any impacts that the project may have on firefighter or public safety or property conservation. Again, this section is very project driven, so your benefits will be derived from whatever it is that you are purchasing and the unique benefits it will have on your department. In some cases, it helps to compare and contrast features on the new equipment as it compares to the old. This is also where you should discuss any negative effects of not getting the award. How much worse is it going to get? Here's a list of resources that can be found on our website. Some of what you'll want to consider for the purposes of planning and preparation are the application checklist that provides you with all the information that you'll need to complete a large majority of your application. The application checklist is also helpful if you're doing a regional application and need to aggregate statistics from all of your regional partners. In this case, you'll just want to provide each of your regional partners with a copy of the application checklist to be returned to you once completed, and then you can put all the numbers together. We discussed the self-evaluation sheets and the narrative development toolkit earlier. In addition to printed documents, technical assistance is also available through the help desk and the regional fire program specialists. Here are the top 10 best practices. Start preparing now. Read the notice of funding opportunity. Use the application checklist and any other resources available to gather as much information as possible in advance of the application opening. Conduct your risk assessment and then align your request with the highest priorities of the program. Make sure when developing your narrative to tell your department's story and the unique reasons for your request. Stay away from vendor narratives, templates, or copying other departments' narratives. Read each question carefully, then answer it carefully. If you are not sure what a question is asking for, reach out to your regional fire program specialist. Make sure that someone else is reviewing your entire application to include your narrative before you submit your application. Make sure that your authorized organization representative has submitted your application. Make sure to account for all eligible costs that you can associate with your request. These include training costs, service agreements, extended warranties, installation costs, and possibly performance bonds in the case of the vehicle acquisition. Ensure that your project can be completed within your grant's 2-year period of performance and articulate that in your narrative. And ensure that you have support from your community's decision-making authority and that they understand that there is a match requirement with this grant. And lastly, print your application using Command or Control P before you submit it. Finally, a reminder to reach out if you need anything throughout the application period. Thank you for taking the time to view this session and for your interest in the 2024 Assistance to Firefighters Grant.